In the windswept badlands of Montana, 13-year-old Ellie stumbles upon a tiny skull unlike any her paleontologist father has seen. It has a sharp beak, a strange ridge, and a warmth that doesn't fade. That night, under a red moon, the fossil vanishes, and clawed footprints circle her tent. Ellie soon finds herself drawn into an ancient memory hidden in the bones of Aquilops, a small dinosaur thought lost to time. As echoes of a prehistoric past awaken in the land, Ellie must follow the path of creatures that remember more than fossils ever could. Some stories run too fast to die. The wind in Montana always felt like a whisper from another time. Ellie stood at the edge of the dig site, watching the sky turn pink with evening light. The buttes stretched across the horizon like sleeping giants, and the ground beneath her boots crunched with layers of dry earth. She had spent every summer of her life here, helping her father brush dust off bones no one had seen in millions of years. She didn't mind the heat, or the dust, or the isolation. What bothered her this year was how small everything felt. At 13, Ellie had grown used to adventure. Her father had once uncovered a complete hadrosaur skull, and 2 summers ago, they helped unearth a tyrannosaur tooth as long as her forearm. But this year, the fossils were few. Her father said it was just a quiet layer. Some years give more than others, he said as he scraped dirt from a fragment of rib. The earth decides. But Ellie believed the earth spoke more clearly to those who listened. That afternoon, while the rest of the team worked in the southern trench, Ellie wandered to a narrow canyon her father had marked off weeks ago. He told her not to go alone, but curiosity always whispered louder than rules. The path twisted between sharp walls of shale. Plants clung to cracks in the stone, and lizards skittered across her shadow. She walked slowly, eyes scanning the ground for any sign of bone or tooth. Near a flat shelf of rock, she spotted something odd. It wasn't big. About the size of a pine cone. It sat half buried in the sand, its edge curved like a beak. Ellie knelt and brushed away the dirt. A small skull. Its jaw was short and hooked, and a narrow bump rose just above the nose ridge. Its eye sockets were large, and the bone felt oddly warm in her hand. She turned it gently. It looked almost like a bird, but too solid. Too grounded. Her breath caught. This wasn't any fossil she had ever seen. Ellie wrapped it in cloth and tucked it into her pack. She climbed out of the canyon just as the sun dipped below the hills. Back at camp, her father examined the skull under a lamp. His eyes narrowed. "It's a juvenile ceratopsian," he said. "Probably Aquilops. Common in these layers. We've found bits before." Ellie looked at the fossil in his hands. It didn't feel common. "It's different," she said. He smiled. "You always say that." That night, the sky turned strange. A red moon rose above the hills, full and heavy. The wind died completely. The camp sat in perfect silence. Ellie lay in her tent with the fossil beside her, unable to sleep. She closed her eyes. In her dream, the canyon was no longer empty. Tall grass swept across the plains. A herd of small creatures ran through the brush, their feet kicking dust into the air. At the front was one unlike the rest. Smaller, faster, with sharp eyes and a sharp beak. It moved with purpose. Its head turned toward her. Then she woke. The tent was dark, but something felt wrong. She sat up and reached for the fossil. It was gone. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside. The wind still didn't blow. She looked down at the dirt outside her tent. Tracks. Three-toed, small, pressed deep into the dust. They circled her tent once and led back toward the canyon. She followed them. Her breath quickened with every step. She didn't know what she would find, or if she would find anything at all. But she knew the fossil wasn't just bone. It was waiting to remember itself. Ellie walked through the canyon with her flashlight sweeping side to side. The footprints were still fresh, each toe sharp in the dirt. The trail wound between stones, leading deeper into the dark. She stopped near the shelf where she first found the fossil. The prints ended there. Nothing else moved. Not even wind. She crouched beside the last print and looked up. A shape moved across the ridge above her. Fast. Low to the ground. She caught a flash of a curved beak and a flicking tail. Then it vanished behind the rocks. Her heart pounded. She climbed slowly, careful not to slip. When she reached the top, she found more prints leading into the scrub. She followed them at a run. The moon lit her path. The earth glowed in pale red. Her breath came hard and steady. She didn't know why she was chasing it. She only knew she had to. After a mile, the prince stopped near a patch of bent grass. Ellie looked around. Nothing. She turned in a slow circle. The canyon behind her was silent. Then something chirped. She froze. The sound came from behind a stone outcrop. She stepped toward it. A small creature stood there. It was no taller than her knee. Its skin was a dull green-gray, and its beak curved down in a sharp hook. A ridge rose above its nose, and its eyes were large and dark. Its tail swayed behind it, stiff but balanced. It didn't run. It tilted its head and chirped again. Ellie knelt. "You're real," she whispered. The creature took a step forward. Ellie didn't move. It sniffed the air, blinked, and let out a soft growl. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. The creature didn't attack. It didn't seem scared. It seemed curious. Then, it turned and ran, fast, like a dart. Ellie stood and chased it again. It led her through a winding path of stones and brush, down a slope, and into a wide clearing surrounded by walls of rock. The moon hung above like an eye. The creature stopped in the center. Ellie entered the clearing and slowed to a walk. The ground was different here. Smooth. Black stone covered in strange white marks, curved lines, spirals, triangles. Like carvings. They glowed faintly under the moonlight. The Aquilops, because she knew now it could be nothing else, walked across the symbols and chirped. A low hum filled the air. The stone pulsed. Ellie stepped closer. The carvings reacted. They glowed brighter. She looked up at the canyon walls. Images appeared, burned into the stone. She saw herds of Aquilops running across plains, chased by shadows with sharp teeth. She saw fire in the sky. She saw one small dinosaur carrying something glowing in its beak and vanishing into a spiral of light. Then she saw herself. Standing at the center of the clearing, holding the skull in her hands. Ellie stepped back in shock. The images faded. The Aquilops let out a short bark. Another shape moved in the clearing. She turned. A second Aquilops stepped into the light. Then a third. Then more. Tiny forms, quick and quiet, emerging from cracks and shadows. Some limped. Some carried scars. Some had feathers where others had scales. But all of them had the same sharp eyes. She was surrounded. They didn't attack. They sat. They waited. Ellie's breath caught. Something was about to begin. One of the Aquilops stepped forward and dropped something at her feet. A bone. Small and smooth, covered in lines like the ones on the stone. She picked it up. It hummed in her hand. The ground shook. A crack opened in the stone beneath her. She jumped back. The Aquilops didn't flinch. Light poured from the crack. It grew into a circle, a window. Inside it, she saw time unfold. Forests stretched where deserts now lay. Rivers curved through green plains. Storms rolled over land that had never seen machines or roads. She saw the fall, asteroids, fire, the end of their world. But in the center of it all, she saw one creature survive. One Aquilops running across burning ground, carrying something hidden in its chest. Memory. Ellie understood. The fossil she had found was more than a fossil. It was a seed. A map. The last keeper of a species that had found a way to store its story, not in books or DNA, but in the shape of its movement, in the lines of its bones, in the rhythm of its running. And now that story had woken. She was the one it had chosen. A chirp snapped her back. The first Aquilops, the one she chased, walked up to her and nudged her leg. She crouched beside it. It pressed its beak against her palm. Then it ran toward the crack. One by one, the others followed. Ellie stood alone in the circle of stone, the bones still humming in her hand. The crack faded. The light died. The symbols dimmed. The clearing returned to silence. The Aquilops were gone. Not erased. Not lost. Just returned. Ellie sat on the stone floor, staring at the place where the light had been. She didn't cry. She felt calm. She had seen something most never would. She had felt the breath of a world that had died but refused to be forgotten. And she was part of it now. When she finally stood, she walked back toward camp with the bone clutched tight in her hand. The next morning, Ellie returned to the clearing. The light was harsh. No clouds. No wind. The air pressed down like something holding its breath. She stepped carefully onto the black stone. The carvings were faded, but still there. The spiral near the center had a new line through it, one she didn't remember drawing. She crouched down and touched the mark. It felt warm beneath her fingers. She pulled the first bone from her pocket, the one the Aquilops gave her in the vision. Its hum had grown stronger. She pulled the second from her bag, the one delivered in the storm. When she brought them close together, the air shifted. A sharp vibration cut across the clearing. The stones trembled. Ellie stood up, heart racing. Then the wind returned, wild and full of voices. The symbols lit up like stars in stone. And from the canyon walls came motion. Aquilops, more than she had ever seen, rushed down the slopes. Dozens. Their feet drummed against the earth like rain. They gathered around her in a wide circle. No sound, no panic. Just presence. One stepped forward. The same one she had seen first. Its eyes locked with hers. Then a shadow passed overhead. A terrible screech echoed from above. Ellie looked up. A new creature dropped into the canyon, twice the size of any Aquilops, its body longer, darker, its head shaped like a twisted mirror of theirs. It had no feathers. Its skin was black and scarred. Its eyes burned yellow. The herd tensed. The new creature stepped onto the stone and roared. The symbols flickered. Ellie's breath caught. This thing was not from memory. It was from ruin. A predator not born of hunger, but of what comes when stories are forgotten. When time is fractured and old paths are lost. The creature charged. The Aquilops scattered, but not Ellie. She held the two bones high. The spiral lit up beneath her. The earth cracked. The dark one stumbled back as light shot upward from the stone. It roared again, louder this time. Ellie ran toward the far end of the clearing. She didn't think. She moved. The same way the Aquilops had shown her. No hesitation. Only rhythm. The lead Aquilops ran beside her. Behind them, the dark one gave chase. Ellie crossed the spiral and leapt over a glowing ring. The creature followed. She led it down a winding path of dust and carvings, symbols she had drawn herself from memory. They lit up under her feet, guiding her like old friends. She ran faster. The creature began to falter. Its steps grew heavy. It avoided the light. Its shadow shrank. Ellie reached the center of the canyon, where the rocks rose like teeth from the ground. In the middle stood a narrow arch made of stone and bone, something ancient, maybe once part of a skeleton, now shaped by time. She ran through the arch. The Aquilops followed. But the dark creature stopped. It growled, eyes locked on Ellie. She turned and held the two bones out again. "Not yours," she said. The creature screamed and charged. As it passed through the arch, the light erupted around it. The spiral on the ground surged. A wind like thunder rose from the earth. The bones in Ellie's hands vibrated so hard they nearly fell. The creature howled, twisted in the light, and began to dissolve. Not into dust. Into fragments of forgotten shapes. Its body split into pieces of memory, broken, scattered, unreadable. Then it was gone. The spiral dimmed. The light faded. Silence returned. Ellie dropped to her knees. She breathed hard. The herd reappeared. They gathered around her in a quiet ring. The lead Aquilops walked forward and nudged her shoulder. Its eyes were calm. Then it turned and walked back toward the canyon wall. The others followed. Ellie watched them go. She stood, knees weak, hands sore, and walked back to the spiral. She placed the two bones into the center and stepped back. They fused, slowly, gently, into one long piece. A single story. The stone beneath her feet cooled. The symbols dimmed. It was over. Whatever darkness had slipped through had been sent back. The memory was safe. She stood alone in the canyon as the last Aquilops disappeared over the ridge. A breeze swept across the ground. It carried no voice. Only a rhythm. A message. Run forward, not to escape, but to remember. Ellie reached camp before sunrise. The lanterns were still lit, flickering low in the breeze. She stepped quietly between the tents and entered her own. The bone still pulsed faintly in her hand. She wrapped it in her field journal and tucked it under her sleeping bag. Her heart still raced, but her hands were steady. When her father woke, he found her already dressed, sitting at the long table, cleaning tools. He rubbed his eyes and poured coffee. "You were up early," he said. She looked up. "I couldn't sleep." He smiled. That fossil of yours still bothering you? Ellie paused. Then she shook her head. It's not bothering me anymore. That day passed like any other. The dig site was slow. A few small fragments. A broken jawbone. Her father cataloged and sorted while Ellie sat near the canyon's edge, sketching. She didn't draw bones. She drew what she had seen, the herd, the spirals, the valley of glowing stone. That evening, she returned to the place where the Aquilops had vanished. The clearing looked ordinary now. No glowing lines. No cracks. Just flat rock and wind. But she noticed small things. Tiny footprints in the dust. A faint scratch on the canyon wall in the shape of a spiral. And in one quiet corner, she found a feather. Not from a bird. It was too rigid, too narrow. She slipped it into her pocket and sat down. The memory of the night before came back in full. The light. The sound. The message. They had not just shown themselves. They had shared their story. Not with words. With motion. With presence. They were not lost. They had simply waited for someone to notice. The bone still hummed. She could feel its pulse in her pocket. Over the next few days, she wrote everything. She described the canyon, the chase, the symbols, and the vision. She drew the creatures, each one slightly different, each face clear in her mind. Her journal filled quickly. Her sketches became cleaner, more focused. She began marking places where the symbols had appeared, mapping the area like a hidden language. Her father noticed. "You've been working hard," he said one night at dinner. "You planning to publish your own report?" Ellie smiled. "Something like that." She didn't tell him the truth yet. She didn't need to. Not yet. Then one afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west. Heavy clouds covered the sun. Wind pressed hard against the tents. The crew packed up and huddled inside the main shelter. Ellie watched the sky shift from yellow to gray. Lightning cracked across the hills. She opened her notebook and stared at the bone again. Its glow had faded. But it still felt warm. That night, the wind howled and shook the canvas walls. Everyone slept uneasy. Ellie lay awake, listening to the storm, heart steady, eyes wide open. Just past midnight, she heard it. A chirp. Sharp and brief. She sat up. Another chirp followed. Then a series of soft steps in the mud outside. Ellie unzipped the tent and stepped out into the storm. Rain hit her face. Lightning lit the sky. She saw them, at the edge of the camp. Two small forms. Heads low, tails straight, eyes locked on her. Aquilops. The same one from before and another slightly smaller one. Ellie walked toward them slowly. The rain fell harder. The creatures didn't move. They waited. When she reached them, the first Aquilops pressed something into her hand. Another bone. Smooth. Warm. But this one had a ridge. Like a handle. She looked up, confused. The creature turned and ran into the night. The smaller one followed. Ellie looked at the bone in her hand and understood. It was a tool. A message carrier. Not just a fossil. A memory key. The herd had not vanished. They had moved into the quiet spaces, between time, between thought, where memory hides and waits. And now they had shared that memory with her. Not to keep. To pass on. She stood in the rain, eyes closed, bone in her hand. She knew what she had to do. Ellie didn't return to the canyon the next morning. She stayed in camp, packing up her journal and placing the second bone carefully inside. Her father noticed she was quieter than usual, more focused. When he asked if everything was okay, she nodded and said she was just thinking. He didn't press her. The dig ended a few days later. The team loaded crates of fossils into trucks and said their goodbyes. Ellie stood at the edge of the site, staring out at the hills one last time. She wondered if they were still watching, the Aquilops, the herd, the memory hiding just below the surface of stone. When she returned home, Ellie spent the first few weeks going over her sketches. She rewrote the notes, added symbols to her maps, and folded the small feather between the final pages of her notebook. It wasn't proof anyone else would believe. But she knew the truth wasn't always meant to be proven. It was meant to be remembered. At school, she gave a report about fossils in Montana. She talked about ceratopsians, their bone structure, and their diet. But she left out the part about the spiral stones and the crack in the earth. Some things needed time before they were shared. She started visiting the museum every weekend. Not to look at the exhibits, but to read the older research papers. She studied paleontology, mythology, migration theory. She compared movement patterns from different time periods. She traced the shapes of bones like letters. It all felt connected. The bones weren't just records of creatures. They were stories that had not yet finished telling themselves. Years passed. Ellie grew older. Her notebooks grew thicker. She returned to Montana the summer after she turned 18, this time not as a helper, but as a field assistant. Her father let her choose the dig site. She led them back to the same canyon. The old symbols were gone. The clearing looked like any other patch of rock. But she knew what had happened there. That summer, she found another Aquilops skull. Small, delicate, with the same curved beak and nose ridge. The others on the team called it a rare find. Ellie called it a memory returned. She didn't tell anyone she had seen the same shape running under moonlight years before. She just wrote it down. Later, she published a paper, not on the fossil itself, but on fossil patterns across seasons. She focused on how movement could shape survival. How memory might guide migration. Her work was respected but considered unusual. Some called it creative. Others called it poetic. She didn't mind. She wasn't trying to convince anyone. She was trying to honor something older than proof. One evening, years later, she stood in the same canyon alone. The sky was clear. The rocks were quiet. She held both bones in her hand, the one she found first, and the one given to her in the storm. She placed them side by side in the center of the clearing. She said nothing. Then she stepped back. A wind rose across the canyon floor. Not harsh. Not loud. Just enough to move the dust. And in that movement, she saw shapes form. The outline of a small beaked face. The curve of a tail. The rhythm of something running, not through the canyon, but through time. She smiled. Aquilops had not come back to stay. It had come back to remind her. That speed is not only for escape. Sometimes it is for return. And some memories run too fast to fade.